Today we're going to be talking about one of the most really unknown and misunderstood views in Christianity, and in particular on the Christian faith when it comes to living out your faith and being a Christian in the workplace. A lot of people talk about that being their calling or their vocation or whatever they're getting their education is. There's all different ways that you can describe what you were made for, what your purpose is, what your destiny is. That's kind of a hot button topic and a hot button language we love to use in evangelicalism now. But the really big question that comes up over and over and over again in our culture, in our churches, and for you as someone who's watching this is, what was I made for? Like, what's my purpose? What's my destiny? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And why would I do it if I don't love it? Why would I do it when it's hard? What if I want to quit my job? What if I don't have a job? What's going on with all this, right? Do I have a purpose if I don't have a job? All kinds of questions. And so we wanted to dive into that and talk about what is biblical theology of vocation, what it means to be a student, what it means to work in ministry, what it means to work not in ministry, and actually how those are false dichotomies. Those are actually inappropriate ways to talk about working as a Christian in general. So we're going to talk about that. Look at the biblical theology behind that, dive into the book of Genesis and a bunch of other things. And so I've got some good friends of mine here that are with me throughout the class, and they're going to be with us over the course of a couple of courses here. And so I'm glad that you guys are here to join us. And so we're going to begin simply by just talking about the book of Genesis. And in the book of Genesis in particular, chapters 1 through 3, the author of Genesis talks a lot about how God creates the world. He orchestrates this incredible creation of the cosmos. And you've got these different days of creation. You've got the sun being created, light being created. You've got creatures being created. There's the animals of the earth and of the sea and the creatures of the air, the birds, all these things. But when the culmination of all of God's creation really comes to a head in day 6, there's this celebration of humanity. You have Adam and Eve, which is a theological statement on the creation of humans themselves. So you've got the man and the woman representing all of humanity. Eve's name actually means the mother of the earth. Beautiful things are really being said in that text. And what's fascinating is that Adam and Eve are actually given what's called the creation mandate, which is a vocational mandate by God to, one, multiply, which literally means to enjoy each other, multiply, fill the earth. There's actually a purpose and calling to every person on earth to be someone who has an ability to procreate or engage in procreation in some capacity. And we'll talk about that in one of our classes on the purpose of intimacy and sexuality. But in addition to the multiplication component of that, God actually tells Adam and Eve that they're supposed to be people who do things. They're supposed to name the animals. They're supposed to have a calling to cultivate Eden itself, which is really interesting if you think about it. Why would God give perfection to a couple and then tell them, cultivate it? You would think that if it was perfect, it wouldn't need to be cultivated, but it actually means to take care of it. It means to increase in its culture, increase in its viability, and make it look more and more and more like what God wants it to. And so in the very beginning of the Bible, we have not just a claim of creation, not just a claim of multiplication, but we have a claim of vocation. What is the purpose of all of humanity? And it is to literally cultivate what God has made on earth, which is very broad. But it begins really to lay a foundation for us to begin to ask the question, what would vocational calling look like as a Christian in the 21st century today? Whether you're a teacher, a stay-at-home mom, you're in school, you work in a church, what does that look like? And so I just wanted to begin by opening the floor up with our friends to begin to dialogue a little bit about what they think vocation means. And maybe we can begin to dismantle some things, dive into some good thoughts, and really help you guys understand and help all of us understand what it means to be a Christian and what it means to do life and what it means to wake up at 8 a.m. on a Monday when maybe you don't want to and go to work, or 10 a.m. maybe, go a little bit later. So But let's talk about that. So Shayna, we've been friends for a long time, and you've been a part of a lot of different like little worlds as we've gotten to know each other. I met you in college, and while you were in college, you were, I believe you were an RA, or at least had some oversight over individuals. But then in addition to that, you progressed into a field that is often not pursued, or it's not pursued in the way that most people would assume. So you were in special education, but not in the way that most people would think about it. And then you had a kind of transfer of vocation for a little while into actually working at a church, and you've kind of dabbled in nonprofit world, all that. So talk about like what it looked like for you to be in college, what it looked like for you to know what you were made for, and then maybe some tensions you feel and some difficulties that you have with that.
Yeah. Growing up, I just always knew that I wanted to work in education in some form, and then had an experience with the special education world and fell in love with that and developed this passion that I didn't know I had. So when I went to college, I was like, for some reason, I have to work with this population of individuals with disabilities. I think I dreamt up a lot about what that would look like. That's a tendency of mine. I dreamt that it would be engaged in the church, that I would be changing church culture to engage with people with disabilities and simultaneously be a teacher. And there's just a lot of transitions along the way, the more that I had experiences. So I was studying to be a K through 5 special educator. Learned really quickly that I wanted to meet a different need, which was after K through 12. So students, after they graduate high school and they have these disabilities, what are they going to do? How are they going to find their purpose? How can they actually start to think about that they could have a vocation? So I went into higher education and worked with adults with disabilities from then. And I had a passion for it. I loved it. It was super hard. That's hard work. And then a year or 2 years, I guess, into that, I felt another call on another passion of mine, which is the church and people falling in love with Jesus. And so my husband and I transitioned to work at a church to step into pastoral ministry. And in a lot of my internal struggle was considering, am I dying to that original passion, that original call that I felt like I had, and coming alive to a new one? Or is this seasonal, or neither of those options? So I've always tied my vocation or pursuit of a vocation to a passion that I had. Like I felt like a passion had to be, that's what would make it meaningful for me.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I love how you dived into the passion component of that, because I think even for our generation, so we're all in our 20s. I'm young 30s, right? And so millennial generation, I think there's a lot of us that we actually claim passion into our calling, right? Which previous generations, that was not a thing. It was, you get a job, and if you work that job for the next 55 years, you have done what you needed to do. They saw their vocation more as a mandate to provide, or a mandate to care for children, or it was more of the mandate seemed to be lacking in calling, what we would say calling or passion or excitement or whatever it may be. And so it's interesting that, and I think that most of the people even watching now, what you're saying is like, that's what people say. Like that's what almost all of us say. Like, and that's why a lot of us, I think, change our majors so often in school, or we come with one specific major and we choose to never change it because we're so set on that. But the passion piece is interesting, because even in Genesis, Adam and Eve, you can definitely tell that there is a desire to do what the Lord has for them. Now you have the knowledge of tree of good and evil and the deception of Satan and the tree of life, and there's a lot going on there where there's a corruption of calling, which the corruption of calling often takes place when lies are imputed into people, that what they're doing is not purposeful, what they're doing is not worthy, and that's, Satan loves to do that. But I love that you spoke to that a little bit. So for the rest of you guys, some of you are in school still, some of you are in university, some of you are out right now, so working in the real world, right? So how does passion line up with vocation for you? And does it not? Maybe you feel passionless about what you actually want to go into, and that's an interesting struggle, right? So what does that look like for you? Do you hold them together? Do you hold them as separates? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would say I'm a student, so I'm in the process of figuring out what am I going to do. Yeah. Of course, I have a job now, but a little waitressing job or a job at the school is just something to get me by, to pay the bills, to eventually get to my ultimate vocation or whatever that is. And
what is that for you?
I'm still struggling to find that out,
Okay.
actually. Yeah, it's...
What year are you in school?
I'm a sophomore.
Okay, so
I
you still have a couple years to... Yeah, okay.
So as I take classes and switch majors, and I am slowly figuring out more of what I want to do and what I don't want to do.
Okay.
And so, I've always tied passion and vocation together because when people ask me, oh, what are you passionate about? And then they're like, oh, so you're going to do something with that.
Yeah.
And so I tie them together of, I want to, because if I'm passionate about something, then I'll love my job. And I think that's something my generation wants, is to have a job that they love. Yet I'd say my parents haven't always gone that route of they have a job just to have a job. And it's not a job that they love, but it's a job that pays the bills. But for me, I want to have a job that I love and I'm passionate about. So it's trying to figure out what are my passions and what can I do with those passions. So
it's an interesting piece that you even speak to on the you want a job that is like that you want to like going to because of the passion. What I find interesting in our generation, and this is actually I think like a pastoral critique and fault of our generation, is that we then epitomize a specific type of job as the job, right? So like, what if an individual has the capacity and only the capacity to wait tables, where we would assume like, oh, that's my get-by job, but somebody else might not have a passion for it, but might have that might be the only way that they are capable of fulfilling the creation mandate of God, which is to cultivate the earth, which is to provide good food for people, to provide nourishment. So it's an interesting world when we dive into the way that we think about vocation as young people. We're like, I want to get excited about it. I want to wake up and I want to be pumped about it. And yet at the very same moment, there are a lot of jobs in the world today that have to happen, that are necessary for the world to flourish, that there probably isn't a single human that's going to wake up excited to do it every day. But there's like almost that, like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do thing, which is a tough thing for, I think, a lot of college students to process through, because you usually don't get your dream job right after college. And then you go back to Starbucks and you realize, interesting, my psychology major got me nothing. Okay, let's keep going a little bit. So, okay, no, I like that though. That's a good perspective from a student. So, Tim, teacher. So what was that about? I mean, you're in university and you wanted to go the biology route. What was kind of the thing for you? Did you feel like that was a calling for you, a vocational dream? Like, what was that for you?
Yeah, so in college, I studied microbiology for 3.5 years. I switched my major
There you go.
my freshman year. But so I kind of came into education around the back end. At the end of my 4 years, I was very much like, I don't know what to do with my life. And someone came along and was like, hey, you should consider maybe thinking about teaching. And I was like, oh, I never considered that. So I applied to this education degree. It's like a 1 year practical, very, very fast.
Yeah, you had the academic side, but you didn't have the actual training of how to teach, right? Okay, the pedagogical approach,
Right, totally. And then I really loved it, stayed with it, and so I'm teaching high school biology here in Denver, and it's good fun. The kids are the best part for sure. Well, the best and the worst. They like surprise you in so many ways. And seeing their eyes light up and get like really interested about biology, something that I connect really well with. And I can just see like God working through biology. And when their eyes are like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, totally.
Like I love that.
So there's a connection piece even again.
Yeah.
Back to the passion piece, back to something you love or something that gets you excited. But there is a practicality piece to it too. Education, very practical, very necessary. It's easier to tie vocation to something that seems like it's influencing culture versus maybe that's something that's more difficult to justify, like working at Starbucks or waiting tables, and you're like, where am I finding purpose in this, for sure. So, awesome. Justin, how are you?
Doing well. But, I mean, I kind of sit on the other side of things where I never changed my major. I mean, you were talking about that. It's like one thing, this is where I'm going to go.
Yeah.
been in school for way too long, as these two know.
What would be the driving, like, vocational desire that you have? Like, when you think of what Adam and Eve were called to and what humanity is called to, which is to cultivate Eden, to cultivate what God has given us, what's the thing that you're like, man, that thing, that job, that whatever, that would be what I feel like would be the most cultivating for God, for me? Like, what would that be for you?
Be relationships with other people.
Okay.
I mean, that was the biggest thing, is like, I enjoy helping people. I enjoy traveling the world and meeting people and talking to people about their different beliefs, and to see how they can possibly just enjoy and change different worldviews of, like, I mean, it's cool to, like, understand, like, travel abroad and, like, oh, we don't have to move at let's just keep going. We can move at a slow pace, and it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm pre-med and never switched. I've always enjoyed it, and I love medicine and love the idea of medicine. But over the past probably 2 or 3 months, I decided not to go to medical school.
Okay.
I mean, I even have taken the MCAT and have made the steps of being able to apply to medical school. But realizing it's like, do I really want to spend another, say, 7 to 10 more years in school or learning, and not really even have an opportunity to travel and meet people? I mean, not saying that you can't have an opportunity to travel while in medical school, depending on what side of medicine you decide to go into, but you're basically going down one path, and this is the path that you're going, and you can't switch.
It's
start over.
Exactly.
You're also got a lot of debt, and I mean, is it really worth it to take $250,000 out on loans? Like, is that really?
So let me ask you this: where does photography fall in for you?
Oh boy.
Because I know that's a passion.
Yeah, it's a passion.
So is that a struggle to justify it? Because sometimes art is not really seen as something that can justify my income, my living, and so it's more like a hobby? Or is it something you're like, man, if someone paid me to do this I would do it forever, kind of a thing?
There's sometimes it's like, if someone could pay me forever, I would do it, but I enjoy it as a hobby, and enjoy not having people saying, oh, this is what I want, or I enjoy it just for myself, and being able to have memories and, like, be able to look back on things. It's a good way for me to remember things and remember memories.
Totally.
But I think the biggest thing for me is the building a relationship with people while traveling. So trying to find a job that is more relatable towards, or a vocation that's relatable to building a relationship. I mean, it doesn't have to be in the mission field. It could be in consulting, or anything you want to do, IT. There's so many different things that are out there.
So I'll reference his books. This is by Timothy Keller. Incredible book. Amazing book. So Every Good Endeavor, Timothy Keller is a boss, and pastors, or used to pastor a church in New York. Now he's a professor, I believe at Gordon Conwell University, but talks a lot about the purposes of work, plans for work, what God really fully intended. And it's interesting. We've kind of talked a lot about how most of us aren't really mentioning anything about ministry. We're not using that language. We're seeing what am I made for? What is my purpose? And whether that happens to be at a church, maybe not at a church, it's more people oriented. It's more passion oriented. And so I think even that dichotomy, is already kind of falling apart in our world a little bit in general. I think our generation does see you could do ministry outside of the context of the church. And we've seen the church not do ministry well in its own context. So we're kind of like, well, if the church isn't good at that, then why would I jump into the church that's not great at implementing change in that way? Unfortunately, I think the church should be a lot better at certain things. But this book's incredible. And one of the things that I wanted us to hit on, and then this will kind of just be our landing plane for us, is there's a couple of descriptions that Timothy Keller gives us on what work can become, and the tensions of why work and why vocation, why we struggle with it. And I'm going to list these out to you, and I want you to just kind of be honest and say if you've experienced these or not, right? So So the God's ideal, which we've already talked about, is that God has an ideal for work, a design for work. He's got this purpose for it. It's cultivation, it's service, good things, right? But then he says there's problems that come up, and one of them is work becomes fruitless. So you see no purpose to it. There seems to be no value to it. Work becomes pointless. So it's not just that you're not seeing anything come of it. You literally think that the tasks that you're doing on any given day may have no point in the eternal perspective of God at all. Work becomes selfish, so it's about your gain, getting up the ladder. This is our parents' generation. Like you work, and you may get up, and you may get up, and you may get up. And then the last one is he talks about how work actually reveals our idols, that it actually reveals the very thing that we maybe love more than him, or love in ourselves more than love in the world. And so I'm interested to see you guys' response to this. So work becomes fruitless. So have you ever experienced that? Work becomes pointless, work becomes selfish, or work reveals our idols. And as you're thinking about those things, what would be one thing or two things that you believe, like, man, if that's my tendencies to be pointless or to see life or work as selfish, how can the gospel speak into that and bring renewal to that? And obviously the answer isn't, well, if I just worked in ministry, everything would fix itself, which we all know is not true, right? So what are those things? And you can kind of just, whoever wants to say something, go for it.
Yeah, the one that sticks out to me is the revealing of idols. So when I switched from telling God what I was always going to do, which is work with special education, and then he prompted me towards ministry, I wrestled with him a lot. I still wrestle with him a lot on it. And so I can speak to the fact that ministry does not fix all of the tendencies that we have. And so I realized that I have an idol of what my dream job would be, how I can reach success, like what I think the kingdom of God, like how it needs to be infused, which I wrestle with because there's a level of what we love is God-given. Like the passion that I have for individuals with disabilities is not bad in and of itself. It matches the heart of God. But I've learned through my transition into ministry or whatever, any job God would have told me to do or called me to, I think I would have wrestled with him. And so I'm learning now that the gospel, just the reminder that like the Lord and Jesus and people knowing and meeting him, if that's happening in any job, like that should be my idol, my goal, my dream, rather than the title that I can achieve or the amount of change that people can see me in.
It's a very kingdom mindset, right? Like if Jesus' kingdom is actually infiltrating every sphere of life, then if that's the ultimate goal, then the idols should fade away. Right. Then the expectations of God to meet my expectations fades away. He's king, he's Lord, he owns this workplace, he owns these people, he owns these people who have been forgotten about by society, or these people that are way too often thought about in society. He cares about all of that, every realm, right? And so, yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah, I think I relate to the fruitless one, especially being a student right now. It's easy for me to get into the mindset of, like I'm going to learn right now, so one day I can do something meaningful. But I'm learning that it's not too early to do meaningful work now, even as a waitress or sitting at a fitness desk where I let people into this, like at the school, or even being a student is a job within itself too. And so right now it's hard for me to feel like, oh, I'm doing something meaningful right now and something that's fruitful right now, instead of saying like right now I'm just preparing myself to do something fruitful.
Well, education's huge because in the New Testament, I mean, it's often said, Jesus says it, Paul says it, that there's an aspect of renewing your mind that's actually a necessary step of discipleship, which is actually allowing the Word of God and the experiential encounters you can have with God to bring renewal. Well, renewal doesn't mean taking your old brain out and putting your new brain in. It means that there's a reworking of how you receive information, how you see the world. That's education. And so if you see education as actually a redemptive thing, then learning is good. Like learning is actually a calling. And in fact, Christians should be the smartest people on the planet. Like we should. Like it's a shame that we're not, and in many fields we have ran from education or learning in certain fields in the scientific community. It's unfortunate Christians are not as often represented, or they're hidden and they don't want to be known. But I think even in learning, right, that can be absolutely what Jesus has just made you for in this season, in an intense kind of world, right? College is this weird bubble of intense everything, right? But learning can be that. So
Definitely.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I can kind of tag off the working at the fitness center.
Yeah.
Because we worked together at one point, and I was just like, sitting at this desk is just so pointless, or it's not fruitful. It's like, what am I actually doing? I'm not actually getting anything productive done anymore, because it's like, I really don't want to do homework because I'm just sitting here. But trying to turn that into, like, towards the end was like just finding meaning of like talking to people, or talking to people that come in and see like how they're doing, and see like how you could be praying for them, or how you could be encouraging them, because you see the same people that come in. If you work the same hours, I mean, you're always going to see the same person that comes in at that time, because that's when they work out. So it's kind of nice to like create relationships and build relationships that you can be meaningful and be fruitful. And then when you see them around campus, you can ask like how things are going, and not just have, hey, how's it going? And you get the, I'm doing all right. You have like a real conversation.
Very cool. Yeah. No, it makes sense. Even in the mundane, there's some meaning to that. So
Yeah, to speak to that, even within education, I feel like sometimes the things that I'm teaching my kids are pointless. It's like, why do we have to teach them about, I don't know, the mitochondria?
Sounds cool, but
Yeah, so like it just feels really weird sometimes, some days, to go in and be like, do they really need to know this? Like, what point does it have? Like, does it impact their lives at all? And so I wrestle with that even within education. It just felt, or sometimes it feels, like pointless. But then at the end of the day, ultimately, it's all about relationships, right? And so you can like walk into work and be like, what's up? How's it going, dude?
Yeah, that may matter more than the mitochondria.
Yeah, totally. Or like, hey, you're killing it.
Yeah.
Like, you totally nailed it.
Yeah.
So that, I feel like, helps me through that.
Yeah.
The other thing that kind of helps me through like feeling as if work was pointless, I'm reading, or I've read a book called Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence.
Yeah.
Good.
It's amazing.
Good book.
And that's just like, such a great book of constantly reminding yourself of like, no, we are always in the presence of God. Always, always, always. And
washing the dishes, presence of God. Making that bed, presence of God.
Exactly. Yeah. So just inviting God into everyday, mundane life, because there really is nothing else. Like, life is what it is. And so if you can have God do it with you, then it's like,
absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
So fun.
Yeah. Well, I think like to finish out, I think like one of the things I love most about in the scriptures is not only do we get this beautiful creation mandate and cultivation mandate in Genesis, but we also see the fulfillment of it in Revelation. And in Revelation 21 and 22, you actually get a description of the kingdom of God finally coming, Jesus finally returning. And I love how it's not heaven. It's not like up in this clouds and everybody's fluttering about and everybody's like singing cheesy CCLI Christian music, right? Like, but there's legitimate engagement. And what I love most about how the fulfillment of all of God's plans coming to their kind of end with Christ returning on the throne is that he sees the Apostle John sees a city. He sees a city that has gates that have their doors open. People are coming in and out. There are leaders, political leaders, literally coming and going from the great city of the Lord. There's trade taking place. And then the one thing that John says is that nothing evil or corrupt will ever enter into its gates. So there's this assumption that culture, that jobs, that teaching, that all of that will actually still exist, but in a redemptively perfect, beautiful way. And it's kind of like our responsibility to just get to then. Like, we may not know in the pointlessness or in the fruitlessness what it all means, but having a mindset that God will renew everything and then make everything perfectly redemptive, it actually is like then the waiting the tables makes sense for a time. The learning makes sense for a time. The in-between the jobs makes sense for a time. And you're like, okay, there's meaning to this. And so I think that's just like, I love how Genesis starts with creation mandate and and a vision for vocation, and it ends with the exact same thing. It's like, no, you were made for something, and you were made for the kingdom of God, so live the kingdom of God now. So Yeah, I think it's a great conversation to be able to have this with you guys, and also for the people watching, just an opportunity for you to learn that whatever you're doing, if you're in school, if you're working, if you feel like you got nothing else going on in your life, you don't know what you're doing, you're not alone, that this group has felt that before, is feeling it now, and also knowing that there is purpose to everything that you're doing, that you can literally wash the dishes and know the presence of God is with you, or you can make the bed and know the presence of God is with you. So be encouraged by that today, friends, and just really glad that you guys were here to join us. So thanks a lot for watching MasterClass on Faith.